In our last video, we were introduced to the herds, the beast herds, and the great phrase that make up a Beast of Chaos army. However, that doesn't really accurately describe what the faction is like, because realistically, it is about 3 different types of sub-factions kind of crammed together into one meta army, if you will. So to make the lore very digestible, what we're going to be doing is looking at them individually, and today we're going to focus on the Brayherds. The collection of mutants and creatures that we know as the Brayherd are the most numerous of any sub-faction or species within the Beast of Chaos faction. They're also the most human. These are the Gores, Ungores, Centaurs, and a few others that we're going to talk about today. Now, as with all the Beast of Chaos that we went over yesterday, 2 things we're going to keep in mind. Like I said, birds of a feather flock together, and might makes right. I said in yesterday's video how that plays out in all tiers and levels of their society. It's no different in today's video. The Brayherd play into the hierarchy, if you will, of any Beast of Chaos army by being the most effective troops and skirmishers. As they are the most numerous, you're likely going to see them as the basic foot soldier, and it's important not to mistake their primitive nature for a lack of intelligence or cunning. These are expert ambushers and raiders. When you see a large army of Gores coming at you making a lot of noise, that's good because that means you don't see the flanking units of Ungor raiders hiding in the woods or in the rocks. They add to the greater army with their mobility, their numbers, their zeal. So even though this is one of maybe 4 sub-factions we're going to cover, they add a lot to it. They add a lot to the greater Beasts of Chaos army. And so now we're going to dive into the individual units. Now, preface, they all have varying amounts of lore. Some have very, very little, some have a lot. Regardless, we're going to cover them all, but we're not going to talk about any of the Tzaangor units. The reason being is I covered all of those units in the Disciples of Tzaangor week that I did, and I'll leave a link to that video down below. Realistically, it's just all the same. It really focuses on their primal nature, but their lore is very much unchanged. But the other units we are going to talk about, I'm going to kind of order them, if you will, in terms of their size, their commonness, and their mutation, which is an important part of their culture. So starting at the bottom with the very humble Ungor. These are the smallest but most numerous unit of any Beast of Chaos army. They are easily bullied, often tortured for this terrible amusement by anything bigger than them, and so they herd together in large numbers for safety. Birds of a feather flock together. And they may seem weak and worthless, but they bring one important thing to the faction as a whole, and that is, wait for it, their hands. It's easy to think that they bring numbers, but the truth of the matter is they are the most dexterous when it comes to using their hands. They are the most human-like. So if any tools or chariots or herdstones or anything like that, weapons need to be crafted and created, the human-like hands with the dexterous fingers and the opposable thumb, all those kinds of things are extremely important. Especially when we look later in the week at some of the bigger and badder mutations, you can understand why they'd have trouble crafting certain items. And I really like this because it makes them a equal part disposable unit, meaning there's just a lot of them, they're cheap, their lives are worth very little in this faction because of how small and weak they are, but also they are vital to the war effort as a whole. And it kind of took me for a curveball. I really didn't expect Ungors to be presented in that way. Their hands are really, truly vital to the faction. Now, next up, higher on the food chain, are the Gores. These are slightly taller than a man, but much, much stronger. And with that strength and agility, they lope into the fray immediately when a battle starts. The leader of their particular herd, that unit as we would know it, is called a foe render, and this is basically a unit champion. But the way that they organize themselves is whoever has the biggest horns or the largest mane gets to be the leader. Obviously, a show of dominance and force would do this as well. This is because they value mutation as a sign of a blessing from the gods. How much has chaos warped you? It's a sign of blessing and might. And as far as lore goes, that's really all we get, is we know that they pick on the Ungors, who's someone who's smaller than them, but they get bullied by things that are bigger than them. I will also add, this is probably one of the most numerous units you're going to see on the tabletop. Ungors are great for being little raiders and things like that, but on the tabletop in terms of gameplay, Gores are a great mix of being a horde unit while also being a little bit tougher. Next up the hierarchy are the Bestigors. And this is really if a Gore ages and gets stronger and particularly adept in combat. If he gets kind of gutsy and wants to rise up the ranks, what he'll do is start tearing the armor off of foes that he's defeated and wearing it. So it looks very disheveled, it doesn't fit, but what he's doing is arming himself to become a better warrior. They wield a two-handed axe, I believe it's called the Despoiler Axe, and they really act as the more elite fighting arm of the Gores. While they are physically similar, these are veterans of war clad in heavy armor. And Beast Lords and Shaman will seek out such warriors to act as their bodyguards or their entourage into battle. But of course they have to be careful, because these are the exact Gores that want to usurp them. Remember, they have this eye for leadership. If a Beast Lord in particular has Gores around him as sort of his entourage, all of them want his position, so he needs to be ready to show force and authority and dominance over every single one of them, but they are valuable to have around. So you get this really cool constant game of these are sort of de facto leaders of the army because they are more elite. They can act as advisors and bodyguards with that. They're leading the army, but they're also trying to survive within it. That the army itself is a dangerous environment. Now, kind of a sidestep from the Bestigors is the Tzaangor Chariots. I say it's a sidestep because it fundamentally is still Bestigors, but here's the thing, some of these Bestigors have seen the war machines of men and want to emulate them. They see the brutality, the destruction that they can cause, and they say, I want to do that for chaos. So they bully a bunch of Gore and Ungore into building a very crude chariot for them. Now, most Beasts of Chaos will scoff at this, saying it's too advanced, we don't use technology in this army, why would you want to emulate something that Order produced, meaning like Civilization, which we're so against, why would you want to emulate something that they produced? And all of those doubts and that kind of put down, it all stops when they see this thing in combat. Because as an aggressive species, they really value being the first to the fight. Well, you know who's first to the fight every time? It's the chariot. They dart off straight in front of the army, are the first to plow into the enemy, and they got two Bestigors just tearing up their foes. So immediately everyone else in the army says, oh, that's really not a bad idea. We get there faster, we get to kill more personally. That's actually not a bad thing, and it shuts them up. Now, it is added here that they are fairly rare and difficult to create because, frankly, it takes all of their combined engineering prowess to put together a cart with two wheels. Again, they're not the brightest bunch in terms of like engineering technology, but they are extremely sly and cunning, so how they use it is brutally effective. But despite their rarity and all that stuff, they are highly respected on the battlefield, despite being sort of an oddity. Next up are the Centaurs. Now, this is again not a step up the ranks, but just kind of another species of Brayherd we're going to tie in here. And this is sort of like a darker imagining of a centaur as we would know it in our world. And just picture a Gore from the waist up, and then a four-legged animal like a horse or something like that from the waist down. And these are used as aggressive shock troops. They're meant to rush the enemy headlong, break up defenses so that the rest of the faction can follow. And they are noted for being a bit more feral and hard to manage than some of the other herds. They often give away their position while they're in ambush, or falling apart when the battle begins and kind of spread out mindlessly. They don't stay cohesive in battle. And this is all because they often get drunk on fermented blood before a fight, so they just like start belching and stuff like that and give away their position and kind of foil up their own plans. Because of this, they are reckless and unruly, but they are again still highly effective in combat. And one additional use for them is that they often act as messengers for Shaman. A Shaman will dictate like dark omens and prophecies and use a Centaur as a carrier of that message to other beast herds in the area or part of their great fray, something like that. What's interesting though is obviously because these things are angry feral drunks, you would think that the message would get kind of lost in translation. However, when the Great Bray Shaman conveys the message, even though the Centaur is drunk and half hearing it, he rushes off, and when then he delivers the message, it's not his voice that delivers it, but is the actual voice of the Great Bray Shaman over on the other end. It's like he literally carried a voicemail through magic and evil. The next units up are both heroes, and we're going to start with the Beast Lords. These are the vicious pack leaders of any given beast herd. What really happens is that a Gore, given enough time and aging and fighting, will grow to a monumental size and use that to assert his authority and control over the beast herd. This is one of the Bestigors who rises up to the ranks and then eventually challenges the current beast lord for control. They are fierce in battle. They fought off everyone who sought to devour them or fight them for amusement. And again, when a Gore elevates to being a Bestigor, that's when he gets kind of drawn into the inner circle and he can be invited to join in the Beast Lord's personal guard, and from there he can then challenge the Beast Lord, say, hey, you were really weak during this fight, I challenge you for control of the Beast Herd. And this means a challenge to the death with a 1 versus 1 while the rest of the Beast Herd watches. And this battle can last minutes or it can last days. But the survivor is the undisputed leader of the pack. And really it's his responsibility to keep the Beast Herd on the move. More of a hunting pack than a standing army. They always need to be seeking new prey, erecting herd stones, fighting off usurpers, anything like that. Keep them busy, keep them moving, keep sowing the seeds of chaos everywhere you go, and also don't get killed by your own people in the process. And the last unit today is the Great Bray Shaman. Now, what turns a Gore into a Shaman is a mystery. Some are born with it, and some change after a gruesome act or something like that, an act of debauchery. Either way, they act as the dark wizards and spiritual leaders in the Beast of Chaos faction. They see these prophetic visions of chaos and anarchy, and with that they share it with the Beast Lord to lead the hunt. And the Beast Lord would be wise to listen and have multiple Great Bray Shamans, because they don't really seek dominance like other Gore do. They don't necessarily want to be in charge, but they want to use their gifts to spread and sow chaos. So again, they kind of step out of this line of raising to the top and being the champion, and they offer a different purpose of I can facilitate that better as a shaman rather than fighting to become the Beast Lord. They cast these dark and fell magics, they make sacrifices on a herd stone, growing its evil aura around them, and they preach about their dark prophecies and omens that they hear whispering on the wind. So functionally they are wizards, spiritual leaders, and advisors of a Beast Lord. So as I like to end all these videos, why are these units cool? What makes Brayherd specifically so fascinating? Well, frankly, these are the meat and potatoes of any Beast and Chaos army. When people of the Mortal Realms imagine the things that live in the woods, that hunt them, that make them afraid, they envision the Brayherd. Why? Because they're the most numerous. They're the things you're probably going to see. And with that, they are wild and savage and untamed, and they possess this kind of cruel intelligence, but a more keen mind than some of the other sub-factions that we're going to see this week. And I love the fact that at every level, they have this grand purpose, right? The Ungors have their dexterity, makes them extremely important. Bestigors with their battle prowess, and how it all kind of meshes together. In addition to that, I love the idea that they just really know the realms very well and use it to their advantage, and this really is taken straight out of the rulebook when they have all different ways of coming onto the board later in the game and moving around, movement shenanigans, stuff like that. The Ungor Raiders are extremely mobile, and all those things are represented in the lore and just translate so well to the tabletop. Sacrificing armor for incredible speed with running and charging, banners that give you bonuses. They really are some of the best units when it comes to someone reads a cool book, like the Beast of Chaos book, and then says, I want to play that, and then it plays exactly like you would imagine it would. Lightly armored, extremely fast, to work in large numbers, it just works. And to me, that's one of the most important things when we review some of these sub-factions is, does this translate well? And I have to say, this is one of the best translations from lore to tabletop there is. But later this week, we're going to see how the Brayherd fit into the larger Beast of Chaos faction as we dive into other things like the Warherd, Thunderscorn, and then having a video dedicated to just the various monsters because there's a lot of them in this book that you can take. So if you are interested in this army whatsoever, or you know someone who is, give it a subscribe and share the link off to them. I would greatly appreciate it. Keep in mind, it will take me longer than a week to review everything. I'm going to have some other content here interspersed because there's just so much in this book that, frankly, I think me and some other people will get kind of burnt out if we just did this for 2 weeks. More than anything, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Age of Sigmar lore. Thank you for watching, and happy wargaming.